hip-hop soul in the crowd. Yeah.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rob and Stu Show here on the Pulse Sports Network. Like and subscribe. Hit us up. Those YouTube numbers keep going up, so we appreciate you. It's NFL draft season, and Roberto, you're bringing somebody to the table who knows a little something about the NFL draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to welcome on my man Justin Higdon of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. I was on Draft Breakdown originally, always on the site. Been an NFL draft addict for a long time, and he does an amazing show. I listen, to almost every episode. And Justin, welcome to the Rob and Stu Show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I love talking draft, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, you get three sickos on a podcast who just live and die with college football, and listen.
Justin,
Stu's a Lions
he's got
fan,
a book.
so.
He's got a book. He's making a book. Okay.
Yeah.
I called him last weekend.
My wife laughs hysterical. She's like, "Really? This is what you do."
7:15 in the morning on a Sunday. Hey, what are you doing? I'm just looking at a little northwestern Nebraska film.
Gotta love
breaking it down. Yeah, real sicko
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, we'll get into.
You guys got 2
2
first-round picks this year, so you gotta understand the excitement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sitting at 10 with that pick. I mean, Roseman likes to move around, so I don't really know if he's going to stick there at 10. But and even Stu's Lions, 2 first-round picks. I mean, it's going to be an interesting draft. It's obviously to start it off here. I mean, all the buzz now seems to be Bryce Young is going 1. We'll break down the positions here. How do you see the quarterback? Your top 3 quarterbacks in this draft?
So I really, I'm an Ohio State grad, so I'll give that disclaimer because, in case people want to think I'm a homer, that's a joke that we do on our show. I'm always, referred to as an Ohio State homer, but I actually really think CJ Stroud's the real deal. And I think he's the best quarterback in this draft in terms of, to me, he's a high floor guy. He might not have the highest ceiling. I think the highest ceiling is probably Anthony Richardson. But CJ Stroud to me is a safe. I think he's solidly going to be a good NFL starting quarterback. Now, some of the comparisons that you'll see, I've seen people compare him to Jared Goff, and I think a good comparison might be Alex Smith. So you might not, again, you're not going to maybe have the highest ceiling, but it's a pretty, decent quarterback class, and I think he's kind of the safest guy. After him, that's where I would probably take the big home run swing and go for Richardson because he's so unique as an athlete. He kind of reminds me of Vince Young coming out of college. I think Vince Young is maybe a little bit more polished as a passer, had more starts under his belt in college. But I see a lot of Cam Newton comps, and I don't see that as the comparison for Richardson. I think he's a little faster than that, and he's obviously he's one of the most, his combine was the best combine of any quarterback of all time. But the thing is, he's really boom or bust. And then after that, I think then you probably go with Bryce Young. But I just think he's so small. And there are NFL people, they think they can get him into a nutritional program and bulk him up. But he's not like the other short quarterbacks that we've seen, like Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield. Because those guys were all squattier and stockier, more muscular than Bryce Young. So I just kind of have some skepticism. He's a really good passer. I don't think he has the best arm, but he's got a good enough arm. And there's no doubt he's like a magician back there behind the line of scrimmage. He's got a really good sense of when things are closing in around him, and he's able to get out and make plays. But he's going to have some of the issues that we see all the short quarterbacks have. And eventually, with guys like Baker, it kind of caught up with him to the point where he wasn't an effective starter in Cleveland. Kyler Murray, I think we saw him struggle some this year. Russell Wilson was great for a long time, but we saw him struggle a lot last year too. So just kind of have my concerns about the height. 5'10" is very short for an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, he's very small. He really is. But
There's no
like,
way I would trade up that much to draft a guy that small. I'd either go with the more comfortable guy like Stroud or the home run pick with Richardson.
it's funny how the draft process works. It felt like after they had moved up, all the momentum was it's going to be Shroud, Shroud. It's going to be Shroud. That there's no doubt about it. Frank Reich wants a quarterback with size. He had a big influence in getting Wentz to Philadelphia when he went and worked him out. It just seemed like Shroud was a lock there. And it's so funny, like all of a sudden in the last 2 weeks, I've noticed it just seems like Young has surpassed him as, that's going to be their guy now. And I was shocked today in Sportsbook. Stroud has went, Will Levis is favored to go before Stroud now, even at pick number 4. You see a lot of buzz that the Texans won't take Stroud. Watching Stroud a lot, I think there's some throws that Stroud makes that really just impress you at times. I mean, there was a throw 2 years ago. It's a specific game, but it was versus Indiana. He made a throw between the cornerback and the safety, and there was a linebacker floating there in the middle of the field. I thought was unbelievable touch pass. Like, you see that in Stroud's game. The touch passes are just, they're really phenomenal at times. I honestly think a lot of scouts are nervous of Ohio State's offense and the quarterbacks transitioning because obviously the plays come from the sidelines. It's a little bit of a different style, but it is amazing that Stroud's just seemed like a lock 2 weeks ago, and now it's like this guy's falling down boards. And I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I don't know. You're an Ohio State guy. I've heard in different podcasts that Stroud doesn't really wow people in the meetings. I don't know if you've heard that, but I've heard that on a couple of different shows that he hasn't blown away people in the in-person interviews.
Yeah, I've heard that too. There's a test, a cognitive test they're using now called S2 where apparently he didn't score as highly as some of the other guys, but he still had a pretty good score. I'm not sure what the issue is in the team meetings, if it's a whiteboard thing or if it's a personality thing. He is a very stoic personality. He's not a rah guy. He's not an electric personality. And so you're probably seeing, you got Will Levis out here putting mayo in his coffee and eating bananas with the peels on, and he's got a kind of a cult of personality around him. He's got like a big TikTok following. Richardson, obviously, he's a charismatic guy. Bryce Young, kind of similar, although he's a little bit more business than some of the other guys, but not quite to Stroud's level where he's almost like a football robot. So that could be a turnoff, I think, for some teams.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works. I mean, I'm a big Levis fan. I think Levis is a top 3 quarterback. Stu has attacked me, just wrote me nasty text messages out of the middle of nowhere, how much Levis stinks and how much I'm wrong. But I really like Levis. I love his arm. I don't know. I'm just a fan of his. Richardson, like everybody says, he's got that kind of upside. He had the Utah game last year, which I was blown away with. I thought he was phenomenal in there, but he's got some atrocious tape too. I mean, he's got some ups and downs himself. And
you've got about a 3-year age difference though too between him and Levis. Richardson's just turned 21. Levis going to be 24 in June. So that's one of the things I factor in when I'm sussing these guys out.
You're 100% right. I never really, early on in me getting into this draft, this whole thing, I never really put much thought into that. And you hit the nail on the head because you hear so many of these scouts talk in the off season when they, they'll do shows or they'll do interviews or even GMs. And I never realized that, but age really does factor in with these guys. And it makes sense, that they don't want some, obviously somebody at that age doesn't usually go that high, but quarterbacks, the NFL is wild. I mean, quarterbacks just, I don't know what it is, but it's just, obviously it's one of those positions. It's the main position. That teams just get crazy. I mean, the EJ Manuels, the Blake Bortles, it's crazy the way
we've seen older guys go in the first round. I think Brandon Whedon was a first
Brandon
round.
Whedon,
against all logic, against all understanding, it still blows me away. But I think the idea behind it is you've got an old, a fully grown man playing football against some teenagers, and then you wonder how especially in football where careers tend to be shorter. I know quarterbacks, if they're good, they're going to be around for a long time, but you wonder how close to the ceiling they are when they're 24 years old, as opposed. Yeah, and I don't know if that's the right way to go about it, because you're doing a lot of projecting, but that's what we do with draft stuff.
Yeah, that's what it is. You're projecting what they're going to be in 3 to 4 years, right? It's not, I don't know. That's how I always try to look at it. Like you're not, if you want to go just straight by production, like to me, being an Eagle fan, I think the Eagles have gotten in trouble a little bit when they do that. Like that's where they got like a Derek Barnett, guys that they were such great performers in college, but then they get to the NFL and they're kind of maxed out, right? Like that's going to be their best is what they already shown. And they're average players. He wasn't really like worth the first round pick, in my opinion. He's just been a guy. He's just been a guy. But anyways, the quarterback position is always interesting. But we'll move to defense here a little bit. We'll go back to offense a little bit later in the show. But Jalen Carter is like the biggest factor to me in this draft. He's my draft crush. I would kill to get the guy at 10. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen. He's going to go before 10. What is your thoughts here on these defensive ends? And, Carter, obviously the defensive tackle, but everybody's number one, pretty much unanimously number one player in this draft, Jalen Carter.
So you probably have heard me talk about Jalen Carter on the original Draft Breakdown podcast. And so that I'm not the biggest cheerleader for this guy. And it has to do with a number of factors. For one, there was a lot made about him being kind of out of shape at his pro day. And that isn't even, to me, that wasn't even a big concern, because it wasn't a surprise. Because I keep going back to that Ohio State playoff game where the camera kept cutting to him on the sideline down on a knee, while Ohio State was busy scoring over 40 points against this vaunted Georgia defense with this player who, many of what I call big draft, the guys at ESPN, the Matt Millers of the world, the Dane Bruglers, these guys were telling us all year long, he's the number one player in the draft. He was in the number one spot in mock drafts all year long. And to see him on a knee and to go to dig a little deeper and go into the snap counts, people were saying, well, Georgia has a great rotation of all these defensive linemen. That's okay. That's fine. But in that game, you could see he was tired. You could see he was tired, and I'm not saying he was out of shape. I just think that's the nature of the position. These guys are huge. They're asked to carry a lot of weight. They're doing battle with other huge guys. But you contrast it with offensive line, where no team has a rotation of offensive linemen. These are big guys who play 100% of the snaps. That doesn't happen on defense. So you have what you have is a track record of getting tired, having to come out of games, and then you've got a position that to me isn't as high of a value, because even in the NFL, you see rookies at that position. Look at his teammate Jordan Davis. He was a rookie this past year. He played a low percentage of snaps. I thought he was a good pick, but I knew that it was going to take some time for him to come along. And even at their peak, these defensive tackles play about 60. These really big guys like this play about 60, 65% at their peak. So to me, the positional value is not there to have him drafted that early. The off the field stuff, yeah, he was part of that drag racing incident with Georgia. Tragic. I think they've determined that he wasn't at fault there. And I think, when that story broke at the combine, I think he did the right thing. He went and checked in, turned himself in, dealt with it, came back. He's answering questions as far as I know about that. So I don't think that's going to hold him back. I think it's going to be I think that might hold him back with some teams. So there's a possibility he falls into the top 10, top 15. But I'll tell you, I never bought that he was going number one, because the last time a defensive tackle went number one was 1994. And the guy was named Big Daddy Dan Wilkinson, of course, from The Ohio State University. Had a pretty good career. He was an athletic freak too. But we didn't get to see, Carter was built as an athletic freak. We didn't get to see it because he didn't test. He came to his pro day and he was tired. So that's my take on him. I've never been as high on him. Is he still the best defensive tackle in the draft? I think we're doing a lot of projecting there as well, because he just doesn't. He's never been a big sack guy. I think what you're looking at, you look at what Quinnen Williams did this year for the Jets, and it took him, into year 4 to really give you that bang for the buck. I think that's kind of what you're going to get with Carter. I think he's a good player. I really think he's a very strong. He's quick off the ball. He's all those things that you like, but I think for the factors that I said is why I wouldn't take him that early. Now at 10, yeah, we could probably be talking about him there.
So
yeah, well,
Justin,
that's
Justin,
Yeah.
if you're not big on Jalen Carter, so I imagine that it boils down to Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson as being your top defensive guy. Who is it, and what's the differential between the two? Because I know a lot of folks will talk about Will Anderson junior year versus senior year. The tape's just different, and then Tyree Wilson. I mean, you're playing at Texas Tech. Who are you going up against? We got the broken foot.
Right.
What to you from watching the tape? Who do you like more?
It's for me, it's Will Anderson, and it's always been Will Anderson because, and I think he's not quite the athlete that maybe we thought he was going to be. He's not Von Miller as an athlete, but he's a little bigger. He came in at over 250 at the combine, ran a 4.6. So I think he's more similar to, he's probably, not the guy we thought he was going to be after the junior year, but the senior year was still double-digit sacks, double-digit tackles for loss. And he was drawing all this attention because of the year he had as a sophomore, where the same people that are now dropping him down in their rankings had said he would have been the top pick last year, right? So I don't think he didn't fall off enough to fall out of that lofty status. He's probably more similar athletically to like a Kayvon Thibodeau, who went, I think, 5th overall last year. Flashed as a rookie, wasn't outstanding, but I think the difference, what makes him better than Thibodeau, is I think he has a better array of pass rush moves. And then you also saw that, especially the sophomore year tape, you saw him play very well against the run. So to me, if you're taking a non-quarterback, to me, he's still the best player. It's surprising to me to hear that Arizona picking 3rd doesn't feel like they feel like he might not be a scheme fit for Jonathan Gannon's defense, which is odd to me because I would have thought, he could be. Look what Hassan Reddick did, and Anderson's maybe not quite as fast, but he's bigger, and he's got a track record as a good pass rusher. So I was kind of surprised to hear that, and that they might that they're looking to trade out of that spot. But I think there's no way to me that Will Anderson gets past Seattle if they're still at 5.
Well, first off, Gannon belongs in prison for costing us a Super Bowl with his horrific defensive play calls.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're not lying though. It is wild to see that. It's so funny how you hear these scouts and you hear these different things that there's only 15 round 1 grades, right, on this draft. Like I've heard a lot of people say that, or it's not a stellar draft. And it is interesting to see a team like Arizona where you'd want to get talent anywhere. You have a chance to get a Will Anderson, and you might pass on him, or you want somebody to trade up and get him. It sounds like now he has a good shot to go into the Texans. I don't know. It seems like DeMeco Ryans, a lot of things, if he's fell in love with him, he wants him to be the leader of that defense. Maybe they're going to pass on Stroud. I think that would be stupid if they passed on Stroud.
I think there's a lot of jockeying going on, right? I think if Carolina moved up to 1 to get Stroud, and then hears that the Texans were never going to take Stroud for whatever reason. Some say it's because of he has the same agent as Deshaun Watson and others. We saw NFL beat reporter John McClain say that they don't care about that. That's not a factor. But so let's say Carolina trade up to get Stroud, and then feels like, oh, Houston really wants Bryce Young. Maybe we can get Houston to trade up to 1 and we still get our guy. Or, maybe Houston saying they don't want a quarterback at 2 so that people will back off, that Carolina will stop harassing them to try and trade up or something like that. So I think there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that's going on still. I think Arizona might be saying, Yeah, I think Arizona legitimately wants to trade back. I think that what we're hearing from out of there is the truth. And I think that they probably prefer, I don't know why, but I think they prefer Tyree Wilson over Anderson for their scheme, or they would like one of the top corners.
Yeah, which is, I mean, and we'll transition a little bit to the cornerbacks here. Your top three corners. Because I tell you what, this to me seems like a very top heavy cornerback class, in my opinion. I mean, I absolutely love Christian Gonzalez. I don't know your thoughts on him. Stu fights with me all the time. I have Gonzalez as quarterback, yeah, cornerback one. I'm a Witherspoon fan. I do like Witherspoon. I just don't know. Here's my biggest question with Big Ten cornerbacks. The wide receiver play in the Big Ten, to me, the quarterback play is atrocious. I mean, if it's not Stroud, half the other league, the quarterbacks don't even belong. Maybe that's because I watch Rutgers or go to Rutgers games on a weekly basis, but I don't know. Big Ten cornerbacks, like I'm not going to bring up his name because Stu's going to start yelling and throwing things. Jeffrey Okuda, but these
And you did
cornerbacks
it
from the
anyway.
Big Ten, they scare me.
So, yeah, one thing I'll say about the Big Ten quarterbacks is I was watching tight ends this past weekend, and that was one thing I was watching Sam Laporta from Iowa, and it was just incredible how he had to make an adjustment to every single pass. Like every pass was behind him, low and behind him. And so you get a lot of, if you watch Iowa, you get a lot of good Sam Laporta adjusting to poorly thrown balls. But with the corners, Stu, do you not like Christian Gonzalez?
Oh no, I have no problem with them.
Okay.
I'm against in principle.
Give him your
just
theory.
take
Give him your theory.
my whole thing is you mentioned it, Justin, that when you have a top 5 pick, a top 6 pick, top 7 pick, you try to go for value. And I don't believe cornerback is a value position. So sans that there isn't a D lineman, an offensive lineman, a quarterback that is worth taking. Okay, sure, maybe if you have that high of a grade on a corner, sure, but you can't take them at a certain point. It's just a lose-lose situation. Personally, if I was running a team, there would be a mandate: no cornerbacks lower than 10.
Yeah, I mean, you make an interesting point. I know PFF has tried to sell that pass coverage is more valuable than pass rush. That's not something I agree with. And corners, I think it's probably the hardest position on the field to play in that you can't,
especially in the NFL, just
you can't you're not allowed to have a bad day as a corner. The fan base will turn on you, the coaching staff might turn, your own teammates might yell at you. I think the team is more understanding of mistakes, more forgiving than the fan base, certainly, but corner's a tough one because you just can't have an off day. You have an off day as a pass rusher, no sweat. You get 2 sacks next week. You have an off day as a corner. It's not like you get guys getting a ton of interceptions. A lot of it's in the pass breakups or in just the balls that aren't even thrown their way because they're covering well. But I do like Gonzalez. I think he's a little bit of a 1-year wonder because at Colorado we didn't see the type of on-ball production, but he's unique because of his height and his size and his long arms, and he's really, really young. He will not be 21 until June. He's got that sub 4.4 speed, so he's got some really good comparables when you look at his measurables and his ball production, like guys like Marshawn Lattimore or Shaq Griffin. So if you think those guys have been good, which at times they have been, but again, they're corners, so they've had not even just rough games, but sometimes rough seasons. So I get what you're saying. The value, I would take him in the first round. I do think it's kind of odd that someone like a team like Detroit, which took Okuda at 3rd overall, and then just recently trades him for a 5th round pick because he just got sapped by the injuries, would then turn around and take a Gonzalez with the 6th overall pick. To me, that kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. But I think there will be a team in the top 10 that goes and takes Christian Gonzalez. I don't think he's as good of a player coming out as Lattimore was, or even like Obviously not like Jalen Ramsey, which was a guy who went early in the draft, but I do like Gonzalez. Behind him, my cornerback two might surprise you guys because I think it's a very good cornerback class, but I don't think there's like 5 first-round corners. I think the next tier of corners, you could say late first round, early second round. I like Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State. I know he came in weighing 166 pounds, but he is an incredible athlete. He ran a 4.35. I do think he could put on weight because he's a tall guy at 6'1". And he's young. He's 22. So I think about, when you're 22, you can be skinny, and then 3-4 years later you can really bulk up if you're getting the right program. And there's nobody in the class that had better production than this guy. 14 career interceptions, 6 career pick sixes, and you can't really watch SEC quarterback tape without seeing Emmanuel Forbes making plays against that quarterback. Famously Levis, who got picked off on a wide receiver screen, and Forbes just absolutely read his eyes, jumped the route, and took it in for a pick six.
That's career shocking. That's very shocking.
But six career pick sixes. I mean,
dare you.
And one of the things I think that resonates with me when looking at defensive backs is the great Bill Belichick. One of the things he looks for historically in cornerbacks and defensive backs in general is taking the last 2 years of a defensive back's career and combining pass breakups with interceptions. And he likes to look for the guys with the most combined pass breakups and interceptions. And Forbes is tops in the class when it comes to that. And I think he's going to be a really excellent player. He's probably going to go late first round at this point because I think other people are starting to. I think NFL teams really like him. You're seeing I think him linked to Minnesota, Cincinnati, teams like that. So I think he's going to go late first round. And my third corner, because I'm stubborn and I won't quit him, is Keely Ringo from Georgia. I know he looked shaky at times this season, but I think when you really get down to it, it's like I was talking about a few minutes ago. There were just some games where he had rough games. And I think teams are worried about his change of direction, but he was fast as advertised, ran a 4.36. He's the biggest corner in the class, 6'2", 207. And I think you can, I don't want to compare him to Jalen Ramsey because that doesn't really work, but I think you can live with him at corner, and some teams might want to move him to safety. And I don't think it's a great safety class. So it'd be interesting to see if somebody has that in mind. But Ringo is a player. I think he got a little bit of a bad rap this year, but he's certainly been part of a very dominant defense. And I think he compares favorably to former Baltimore Raven Jimmy Smith. And so he's a player that's not going to be appealing to every NFL team, but I think he's still appealing to a number of schemes. I think he's going to fit and be a good player. I think he's, one of the things we see in these, and Rob, you're a draft junkie. So sometimes these really highly touted guys kind of, I don't want to say sleepwalk through their last year, but they kind of have their eyes looking ahead.
Oh yeah.
And we saw it with Ramsey. That was one of the things we saw with Ramsey. Jamar Chase didn't even play the year before he went pro. Jackson Smith and Jigba, just, he said,
Parsons.
Look, my hamstring's no good. I don't want to get re-injured and risk the draft. So guys look ahead. I think that's maybe a little bit what happened with Ringo. And we've seen it work out for guys at the pro level. I think we don't want to read too much into it.
Yeah, me and Stu actually have a bet going about Ringo because I said he'd be drafted in the first round, and Stu said I was insane. So we were arguing about that. So I think he's going in the first round too. I
think Stu might be right that he goes, but it'll be early second round. I think there's no way that somebody's going to look at a guy 6'2", almost 210, who runs a 4.3. And, he did have some on-ball production a couple of years ago. And we saw him, he sealed the deal in the national championship game 2 years ago. Everybody seemed to erase that from their mind. But he's still a good player. I think NFL teams are probably going to be feeling safer with other guys, and that's why he maybe slips. But somebody's going to luck out with him early in the second round.
I'd tell you, Deontay Banks is a guy I really love too.
He's my
being a Big
fourth.
Ten guy.
He's my fourth corner.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think there's a chance he goes late one, early two. I mean, he seems to be getting a lot of buzz himself. So
Yeah, and I
there's a
have Witherspoon as my corner 5 too. So those guys all have really good comparisons when you look at their and they most of them have really good production when it comes to pass breakups and interceptions combined. So I like those guys. I'll give you a name for a slot corner, and that's going to be like third round, but that's Travius Hodges Tomlinson from TCU. I really love the way that guy plays. He reminds me of Avonte Maddox, guy you're familiar with. Really productive. I think he won the Thorpe Award. Really good player. He's not going to play outside. He's tiny. He's like 5'8", but he's going to be one of the top slot guys coming out of this draft.
It's funny here. One of his pro comps is Nikhil Roby-Coleman. So there you go.
Okay.
That he was a good slot corner for a
Right.
while. So
And
that's
value.
it. That's his comp.
Stu, talking about position value. If you can get a guy like that in the third round, we know nickel corner, slot corner is kind of a de facto starting position for a lot of teams these days. It's a good value.
Yeah, I mean, you want to take a corner in the third round, by all means, slot corner, filling in gaps. Last question as we wrap up here, Justin. You mentioned Emmanuel Forbes. That's a guy that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily see in their mock draft per se. You mentioned your thoughts on Keely Ringo. Is there a guy outside of those two that you mentioned that you have a first round grade on that you think will get drafted in the first round? That is a guy that's we're not paying attention to because they're second round or third round in mocks or something. Who's going to be that Cole Strange that in last year's draft that just picked out of nowhere, don't know him, or shocked? Is there a guy like that?
I love that question. It's tough to say that because I've seen some people are getting really creative with their mock drafts lately. So we're seeing more and more names. It's there's only 31 picks for the mock this year, but we've probably seen about 55 names in those mocks. So it's a little tricky. Receivers are wild cards. So if somebody falls in love with a receiver, you might see a name, but we've seen probably 5 or 6 receivers mocked in the first round throughout the year, even though I think there's only going to be maybe 2 picked. So I'll give you a name that we were seeing in some early mocks, and now we're not seeing as much, but I still think, to me, he's the best linebacker prospect in the draft, and that's Drew Sanders, the linebacker from Arkansas. So I don't know if that's a hot enough take, but he was a player. When Seth and I did our mock draft, our first one of the year back in October, I mocked Drew Sanders very early to the Patriots because we were doing like a top 10 mock. And I was, kind of being half serious, but I said, this looks like a Patriot guy. He moves up, they move him all around. He can pass rush. He can play off the ball. And he just gives you a lot of versatility. He's a great athlete. And so he was a pass rusher at Alabama, comes to Arkansas. They move him off the ball to middle linebacker, but he still does a lot of rushing the passer there. So productive. He can cover, he can run. And he's got a range of comps that gives you both pass rushers and linebackers, off the ball linebackers. So Randy Gregory is a physical comp that works for him from the pass rush standpoint. And he does have an array of pass rush moves. He's not just a guy who just relies purely on athleticism. He knows how to, he's been coached up. He knows how to get to the quarterback. And then if you want a linebacker comp, Devondre Campbell, who's now, I think, with his third team, but he's earned a lot of money playing in the NFL. I believe he was a late day 2 pick or mid to late day 2 pick.
Out of Minnesota, correct?
Yeah. And he played for, I know he plays for the Packers right now. I think he started with the Falcons, played for the Cardinals.
Yeah.
So he's made a lot of money, and he's been a player that's attracted a lot of attention when he's hit free agency. So Drew Sanders, a guy I really like. He's, to me, the top linebacker prospect in this class because of all the things he can do well.
And originally he was at Alabama. So that tells you right there. I mean, the talent that he Saban seen it. He's seen something in him that he liked. I
Yeah,
absolutely love him. He's one of my
Yeah,
gems in
this
this
is a
draft.
pro Drew Sanders show.
okay,
Absolutely.
great.
I'm going to spit off 3 rapid fire questions. I could go all night long.
Okay.
Lucas Van Ness. Do you have Van Ness as a top 15 player? I love Van Ness. I think he could be. This will probably get me banned off draft Twitter, but if he adds a little weight to him and he gets just a little bit better, I think he has JJ Watt comps. I really like Van Ness's upside.
I like Van Ness a lot. I do think he's a top 15 player in the draft. But he's kind of you know what else I love about him? He looks like an 80s movie villain, like in like an 80s ski
Yeah.
movie.
He
or
should have been
like,
in the Terminator. Yeah,
yeah, or he
absolutely.
could have been in, the Dojo and Karate Kid.
Yeah.
He looks like one of those guys. One of the Sochas and the Outsiders. He I like him a lot. He's 6'5", 272. He's got long arms. I don't know what Iowa was doing, why they didn't start him. It just seems like stubbornness on their part, but there's some guys that big running a 4.58. That's something. The one thing I'll say is I think I agree with people that say he needs to kind of learn pass rush moves because he relies heavily on that bull rush. And we saw the bench press kind of indicates that he might need to get stronger in his upper body, but he has strong lower body strength. I don't think is a question. Guy he reminded me a lot of both from a metric standpoint and even on tape is Ziggy Ansah. And that was a player coming out of BYU who was considered raw, but who learned how to rush the passer as a pro. And the good thing about Van Ness is he's coming out a couple years younger. Ziggy was like 24 when he came out, and Van Ness is only 21 or 22, I think. Yeah, he'll be 22 in July. So, there's too much athletic upside in this class. And like Stu's saying, this is a defensive lineman. This is a guy who can play end. You can probably kick him inside for some snaps if you need to, but I think that's kind of not going to be his best role. But he's that kind of player that his position value and his athleticism, the way you can project that, and he was productive, even though he didn't start. So I think that's a player I would definitely take in the top 15 in this class. And I think somebody's going to.
Right, and you made a great point before too. Even with Jalen Carter, these guys need time to develop a little bit in the NFL. You get them into a rotation. Like when we had Hargrave in Pittsburgh took him a few years, and then he got a hold of it. Even Fletcher Cox took him a few years. Like a Brandon Graham took him a few years. It
Right.
takes these guys a little while to get into the transition.
We look at Nakobe Dean, who the Eagles got in the 3rd round. He barely played a snap on defense. And now he's going to step in and start because they let TJ Edwards go in free agency. So you don't have to have instant results. That's what we want as fans, but you don't have to have it. So Van Ness is a player. I hope he gets I hope he gets a little time to pick up steam, but I think he's going to be a really good player early on.
I'm with you. Bijan Robinson, worth the top 10 pick?
No, I don't think so. It's not that I don't like him. I actually like him a lot. It's just that I feel like I don't know why he's worth a top 10 pick now when people argued vehemently that guys I thought were a little bit better, like Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, notably, were not rated as highly by DraftNix. Now, Barkley ultimately he goes number 2 overall, and we could argue positional value on that. I thought he was a top 5 player in that class. But I thought Jonathan Taylor was too, and he ends up going 41 behind 2 other running backs. Remember, Clyde Edwards-Helaire inexplicably goes before him to the Chiefs. The Chiefs can you imagine the Chiefs with Jonathan Taylor?
Well, I think too that speaks to, we've had this conversation, Rob, but Edwards-Helaire kind of fit what Andy Reid, that offense, a little bit more than what Jonathan Taylor would. No,
I think he thought that he did because I think there were questions about Taylor as a pass catcher, but he's caught plenty of passes in Indy.
Oh yeah,
and,
for sure,
done very well. But also DeAndre Swift went ahead of Taylor that year. So Bijan, I think, is a really good player. But he's probably going to be a 1st rounder, and I have a 1st round grade on him. But top 10, I just think he's he's very good. I just don't think he's as good as the running backs have gone in the top 10. But I've compared him to another first round running back who has had a pretty good career. I think he's kind of winding down his career now, but Melvin Gordon. So I think he's a good player, just not otherworldly like some people are saying.
Yeah, I mean it's such an interesting debate with him. I mean, since
He does a
Jalen
great
Reagor, I'm
job.
skeptical of any Big 12 player, but I mean, he makes phenomenal plays.
He does a
does
great
make
job, like contorting his body, like making sure he doesn't get hit hard. He doesn't ever take a big hit. I remember his freshman year, he almost got folded in half on a hit. And you thought this guy's season's over. And he's so flexible. He came back in a couple plays later. But doesn't have that burner speed. He's 4.47, which is good. That's Ezekiel Elliott ran a 4.47 coming out and went 4th overall. So it's not that I don't think Robinson is a top 10 player in this class, but I do think there's still a possibility he'd go in the top 10.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and we'll close the show. The offensive tackles in this draft. I'm in love with Paris Johnson. I honestly think he's the best tackle in this draft. Size, I think the ability to get better. I think he's head and shoulders above. Your thoughts here on the offensive tackles?
I think it's a good class for offensive tackle, and I agree with you. I think Paris Johnson's the number 1 offensive tackle. I think Seth and I talked about on our show all season long that Peter Skronsky was going to be a guard, and now you're starting to see that show up. So Skronsky, most scouts, so most pundits have moved Skronsky to guard, and still think he's going to be very highly picked. I agree with that, but I just think he's got that he's kind of that Zach Martin type in this class. So I don't have him listed as an offensive tackle, but I do think he's going to go in the first round. Paris Johnson to me was the top offensive tackle, and the player who's gaining the most steam right now is Darnell Wright from Tennessee. He was their right tackle, and he's probably the most accomplished as far as the most starts. He has started for 4 years, 4+ for Tennessee, and a guy that big, 333 pounds, ran a 5.01 He's almost, remember Greg Robinson went number 2 overall. I mean, that's how athletic Darnell Wright is. Nobody's talking about him number 2 overall, but now finally people are putting him at the end of the first round. So I think he's going to be a first rounder. And in between those two guys, I have Georgia's Broderick Jones, who I think is also a first round caliber player, but he's the interesting thing about Jones and Paris Johnson, both of those players only have really 1 full year starting at left tackle. And I typically like my offensive linemen to be 3 or 4 year starters. So that's where Skronsky maybe has a leg up on those guys just as an offensive line prospect. But both those guys, Paris Johnson played right guard for a time before moving to left tackle this past year. And then Jones was actually not a starter with Georgia till the end of his sophomore year, and then was a full-time starter this year. So those two guys, interesting for their lack of experience. So there might be some growing pains. Remember when Andrew Thomas came out of Georgia, everybody thought he was a bust year 1. Now people think he's just fine, and he's been really solid for them.
Yeah, he really turned it around for the Giants. The Giants in the beginning, they were only playing him. They would mix him in. They would actually switch tackles during the game. You rarely see that. And, he got so much better. But even this year, Neal for them, Neal got absolutely rolled in games, and he looked like a can't miss.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be fine too. And it's just we're Penei Sewell. Remember Penei Sewell when he first started playing for the Lions? People were down on him. They were crushing him. And even just by the end of his rookie year, people were back on his good side. So these guys, just like the other players we talked about, some of them, you need to put them through growing pains. Not everybody is Joe Thomas coming out and just becoming an all-pro early on.
Lane Johnson had a game early on in his career. They played Kansas City on a Thursday night. He got absolutely smoked the entire game. And the media was in his face after the game, and how could you have a game like that? And
Mhm.
he said it was like a welcome to the NFL moment of like, oh man, this isn't, that this is the truth. These guys need a little time.
Yeah,
And
Jack
I think
Conklin was another guy, got killed as a rookie. And he needs tight end help and this and that. Well, Conklin's had 2 big money free agent contracts since then. So, people
Some say the greatest tackle ever to come out of the Big Ten.
here we go.
Some have said
Here
some
we
have said
go.
that. I've read that on Twitter. Some have said that.
Well, I'm never going to speak ill of Jack Conklin. He played admirably for my favorite NFL team, the Cleveland Browns. So,
Justin, we can't thank you enough for coming on, man. I could go all night. I could go for another 3 hours. But go ahead and plug your show, man. Tell the people where they can find you. And thanks again for coming on and doing this.
I appreciate you guys having me on. Everybody, you can find me on Twitter at AFC2NFC. That's the number 2. And then you can listen to our show. It's on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere you find your podcasts. It's called The Original Draft Breakdown Podcast. We just did episode 186 because we go back all the way. We count the episodes we did for the old Draft Breakdown site too. And then we also are on Patreon. So The Original Draft Breakdown Podcast on Patreon, where every week we do a bonus episode. For that, it's just $2 a month, less than a half a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and $4 a month if you want our full scale, everything that we do, which that's going to include my full rankings. It includes some other discussions, but I do those full rankings as like mini podcasts. So, and we appreciate anybody who listens to our show, whether you pay for it or not. We just invite all the feedback that we possibly can get. We love doing it. We love talking draft. My co-host Seth Cox and I, and we just really enjoy it. And thanks again for having me on, because I could talk about it all night too, Rob.
Well, no, thank you, Justin, and please go check out Justin. He's doing the Lord's work out there. He's got some Temple, South Florida tape that he's got to go through still. God bless you. Anyway, that'll do it for us. We'll be back soon, but until then, take care, brush your hair, and we'll see you after a while.